When we hear a gospel like this, we have to realize right away that the gospel is not for sissies. And Jesus is very honest. Sometimes somebody will present something to you and make it sound like, hey, this is really easy. This is going to be a wonderful trip for you. Jesus said, this ain't going to be easy. And there's going to be a lot of difficulty and a lot of challenges for those who want to follow me. Let's take a look at where we are in Matthew's gospel. We know that this is the year of Matthew. We're looking at Matthew and his gospel in detail this year. And as I told you in the past, this gospel is written around the year 85. And we believe it comes from Antioch in Syria, where there was a large Jewish congregation. Congregation is quickly becoming more and more Gentile, but with the Jewish foundation, Matthew wants to make sure that his Jewish constituency understands that the gospel is the fulfillment of everything that the Old Testament spoke about. As a matter of fact, in this gospel, he has Jesus telling people, not one iota, not one jot, not one little period of the law is going to pass away. So he's saying, hey, look, don't think that just because you become a Christian that you don't have to pay attention to the rules anymore. No, they're still in effect. But I'm here to fulfill the rule that you're not saved by the kosher laws, for example, but you are saved by faith in me, but that does not dispense you from leading a good moral life. So sometimes people say, well, we don't have to worry about the Old Testament anymore. Oh, yes, we do. Okay? Now, you remember, going back a few weeks, we talked about the Beatitudes, and that is the equivalent of the 10 Commandments from the Old Testament. Remember, 10 Commandments given on Mount Sinai. Now we have the Mount of the Beatitudes, and Jesus is teaching the new law, the fulfillment of the old law. It's not simply, you must not, but now he's saying, and now you must do this. So things, they got a little tougher. Okay, Jesus did not let anybody off the hook. He never does. He never does. All right. Sometimes we have this picture of Jesus in our minds. Oh, anything goes. He's nice. Anything doesn't go. You got to go by the book. You got to go by the book. All right. Now, after the Beatitudes, we have a whole bunch of other teachings coming in. And of course, those teachings have to be obeyed. When you go home, you read the other teachings. They come at the end of the 5th chapter and 6th chapter of Matthew's gospel. Today, he is talking about how difficult discipleship is going to be. But you might recall last week, he named the disciples, and he called the disciples by name. Remember, he named them all? Peter and James and John and Judas. He named them all. And he gave them the mission to bring the gospel to the whole world. So gospel is for the whole world. One church is not as good as another church. Okay, one religion is not as good as another religion. We're called to follow the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is where salvation comes from, through the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, here, it's kind of a warning. I told you, this is Jesus is not pulling any punches here. He's telling us that we have to live the gospel, and we have to be forthright and honest with the gospel, so that we have to give witness and testimony to the whole world about what we believe. And we have to put that into action, and we just can't hide from preaching, teaching, or living the truth. And that's kind of threatening, because sometimes, matter of fact, most of the times, especially when you're living in a culture that is the antithesis of the gospel, to open your mouth and say the truth may cause you a great deal of problems. Right? Like what? I want everybody to love me. If you're living the gospel, everybody's not going to love you. Right? Jesus lived the gospel, didn't he? The apostles lived the gospel, didn't they? Where did they end up? Persecuted, martyred. But it applies to us too. It's not just about them. So you begin to live your faith, to teach and preach and speak the truth, you might find yourself in trouble, in big trouble. You might be persecuted emotionally, financially, socially. Now, I'm going to tell you a good story that I heard. This is a true story. Just happened within the last week or so about being willing to speak the truth and stand up for your faith, and then the consequences that might come because the devil can't speak the truth. And the devil has control of our culture, control of our society. So he's going to make every effort to attack those who try to live out the gospel. This man, name is Chad Schraft. Chad Schraft. Chad is a programmer for software. I think his specialty, or the company's specialty, Beer Warden, I think that's the name of the company. Anyway, he was working on what they call malware. Now, if I got this right, malware is to stop bad people from breaking into and stealing your information. Is that what it is? Malware? To stop Putin from getting involved, you know? That Putin. He thinks he can fool us. We know what he's doing. And you see, so there's malware to help people from stealing your information. Anyway, the company that he worked for, Beer Warden, it decided to get woke. They're all getting woke these days. And part of woke is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what do? Well, HR gets involved. And HR sends out to everybody that works for the company a questionnaire. The questionnaire was, what is your preferred pronoun? That means, if you think you're a girl and you're a boy, you could say, I want to be him, or you, or them, or they. I mean, you could just say whatever you think you are. If you think you're a cat, you just say you're a furry. I'm not kidding. All right. So anyway, he sends back in, everything's on the computer these days. He says, I identify as the person that God made me. Oh, bad. You can't say that anymore, right? Well, first of all, what's bad about that? You mentioned God. Hey, that's the first one. And then as God made me, well, that means if you're a boy, you're a boy, and you got to be a he or him. And if you're a girl, you're, her, But that doesn't fly anymore if you woke. So the HR gets all upset and they say, you can't do this. Why not? I'm identifying as the person God made me. Well, it's causing a hostile environment. A hostile environment. And he got fired. He's living the gospel. I'm the person that God made me. That's what I identify as. Got fired. You see, that's living the gospel. And you see the persecution that comes if you live out the gospel? Would have been just as easy to say, I identify as him, but no. And the message got across. I identify as the person that God made me. So the culture, it's a war against God. Don't kid yourselves. It's war against God. And all of this woke stuff, of who you identify as or what pronoun you have, at the root, it is a war against God, the way God made us, that we are God's creatures and not creations of what we think we are in our heads. I could go on with this for a long time, but I'm not. You know me. Anyway, but then what happens? I saw something that was just just wonderful. Sometimes you think, hey, the whole world is all screwed up and, God better come right away. I was getting this back operation. I'll tell you about the back operation. So, a lot of good stuff happens. Plus, I got healed. I'm waiting, in the pre-op, and the nurse comes in. She says, Father, the doctor wants you to know that an emergency just came in. A young man had a brain bleed, and he wants to take care of him. I said, good, you tell him to take good care of him, make him better, then he could make me better. All right? So I'm held up about 2 hours. And I say, well, what am I going to do here for 2 hours? The nurse says, would you like to watch television? I said, only if you have the Three Stooges. So, oh, Father, we don't have the Three Stooges, but I'll bring you the set, and if you want to, you just watch it until the doctor's ready. All right. Turn it on, and what's on? The hearings for John Durham. Remember John Durham with the Durham Report? And they had the congressional people, interviewing him. Some were nice, some were not very nice. And usually I don't have a chance to watch, a whole hearing. They go on forever and just, I can't take it for a long period of time. But I had nothing to do, and I'm laying there and I'm watching the hearings. And I'm listening to this guy Durham, and I'm saying to myself, he sounds really good to me. I agree, with the way he's answering the questions. There was an honesty about him, and he also knew the limits as to what the commission was allowed to do and what it wasn't allowed to do. So if you're on these commissions, you're told to do this, and you investigate what pertains to what you're commissioned to do. You just, can't go rogue and say, well, I want to get this one, I want to get that one. You don't want to overstep your bounds in those things. For credibility and for honesty and all of those other things that are very important. You don't hear about honesty and credibility anymore, do you? Everything is like, kind of like made up as you go along. It's the narrative. It's the narrative. You make it up. Well, anyway, he was, that sounds good. And then gets to a point where one of the representatives, I think it was North Carolina, he says to him, aren't you worried about your reputation? And Durham says, I only worry about my reputation with people I respect, with my family, and with my Lord. Wow! Holy cow! So the nurse comes, the doctor's ready for you. I said, come to me 5 minutes. I gotta finish this. So, yeah. But, you don't hear that. You don't hear that. And I went home and I said, I wonder what religion he is. Sure enough, I looked it up. Devout Roman Catholic. Devout Roman Catholic. All right. That's what the gospel is all about. That's what the gospel is all about. So sometimes you think, the whole world looks dark and it's caving in on us. You get that ray of light every once in a while. Even in a place like Washington, D.C., you have a man who stood for the truth and spoke about himself and his relationship with his Lord. And so I quote scripture again. What does it profit a man if he gain the whole world and loses his soul? So speak the truth and put the devil to shame. God love you.